The city of New Alexandria had once been a symbol of human achievement, a beacon of progress and unity. Now it was little more than a shattered ruin, crumbling under the relentless assault of the Concord. Streets that had been filled with life were now barren, the air thick with the acrid smell of burning debris. Above, the alien warships hovered like vultures, their menacing silhouettes blotting out the sun. It was the end for Earth, or so it seemed. Captain Uriah Dorian stood at the edge of the crumbled city, gazing out at the horizon where the alien fleet loomed. Her face, streaked with dirt and blood, showed the wear of years of fighting. Her once pristine uniform was torn, stained with the memories of countless battles. She had fought in every major engagement of the war, seen friends and comrades fall, and now she was here, standing on what might be humanity's final battlefield. Behind her, a group of survivors, soldiers, engineers, civilians, gathered, their eyes filled with a mix of dread and determination. Among them was Lieutenant Kellen Reyes, a young officer who had become Uriah's closest confidant during the conflict. His hands gripped a weapon, his knuckles white with tension. He looked at Uriah, silently asking what they would do next. "We fight," Uriah said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. The last remnants of humanity were pinned down in the ruins of their own home, the Concord closing in on all sides. But there was something else, something buried deep within the earth itself, a secret weapon that had been hidden away long before the war began. Uriah's team had uncovered a map to an underground facility, a vault built by the old governments as a contingency against an existential threat. They hadn't fully understood its significance until now. What was inside that vault could change the course of the war, if they could reach it in time. "We need to move quickly," Uriah said, turning to the team. "The Concord will strike within hours. If we don't get to that facility, this war is over." Kellen nodded grimly. He'd been with Uriah from the beginning of the resistance, and he trusted her more than anyone. He knew she wouldn't say something like that unless it was true. The team, a motley crew of soldiers and scientists, had already been through hell. Many had lost everything, families, homes, the very planet they fought for, but the spark of hope still burned in their hearts. The underground vault was their last chance, and they were willing to risk everything to unlock its secrets. As the group moved out, Uriah's mind raced. The map to the facility had been vague, its details encrypted by old codes. They'd only been able to decipher enough to get them close, but getting there wasn't going to be easy. The city was crawling with conquered forces, and the air itself seemed to hum with the threat of annihilation. The team had only one advantage: they knew the city better than the invaders did. That, and the relentless human spirit that refused to let go. As they moved deeper into the ruins, Uriah could hear the faint rumble of the alien warships overhead. Every step felt heavier than the last, but there was no turning back now. They were humanity's last hope, and the war for Earth's survival had only just begun. The underground facility was hidden deep beneath the remnants of what had once been the thriving heart of New Alexandria. The team's footsteps echoed through the darkened corridors as they navigated the crumbling passageways, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional hiss of static over their comms. Uriah led the way, her mind focused on the task ahead. Every second counted. The Concord was closing in on the city, and their forces were relentless. "This place gives me the creeps," Kellen muttered under his breath, his voice low, as they passed through a chamber filled with rusted machinery and abandoned equipment. "Feels like we're walking into a tomb." "It's the last place they'd look," Uriah replied quietly, her eyes scanning every corner of the dimly lit room. The vault they were heading to was rumored to contain a weapon so powerful that even the Concord would hesitate to use it. But if they were going to have a fighting chance, they needed it, and fast. They reached a heavy steel door, rusted over with years of disuse. The old security code was nearly forgotten, but one of their engineers, Marla, had managed to decrypt it just in time. With a mechanical groan, the door creaked open, revealing the facility's central chamber. The room was vast, far larger than anything they had expected. Rows of dormant machines stood in the shadows, their purpose unclear. The air hummed with a strange energy, and in the center of the room lay a massive structure, an ancient warship, its hull cracked but still gleaming with the remnants of forgotten technology. The ship was unlike anything Arya had ever seen before, its sleek design a far cry from the crude, makeshift vessels that the humans had been forced to build in the war's early days. "This is it," Arya whispered, a sense of awe creeping into her voice. It was a weapon, all right, but not just any weapon. This ship had the potential to turn the tide of the war, if they could figure out how to unlock its power. The team moved quickly to work, as Marla and the other engineers began accessing the ship's systems. The silence in the chamber was broken only by the whirring of old tech coming to life, systems long dormant beginning to hum with energy once again. But as the ship powered up, a faint alarm sounded. Arya froze. "They've found us," Kellen said urgently, his hand reaching for his weapon. "The Concord's here." Arya cursed under her breath. They had been hoping to stay hidden, to repair the ship and escape before the Concord's forces could react. But now, their presence was known. The countdown had begun. "Everyone, into position," Arya barked, taking charge. The team split up, rushing to defensive positions while the engineers continued their work. Kellen and his squad of soldiers moved to the entrance, preparing to hold off any Concord troops who might come through the door. It was a desperate gamble. Humanity's survival hung on the success of this operation, and they couldn't afford to fail. The first wave of Concord soldiers arrived moments later, their weapons crackling with alien energy. The humans fought back fiercely, using every trick they had learned over the years of resistance. Arya led the charge, her tactical mind working in overdrive as she coordinated her team's movements. The battle was chaotic, with gunfire and explosions echoing through the corridors. But despite being outnumbered, humanity's resilience was undeniable. Just as it seemed the tide was turning in favor of the invaders, a low rumble shook the facility. The ship, humanity's last hope, had come to life. Its engines roared, and with a flash of blinding light, it shot out of its resting place, tearing through the facility's ceiling. The Concord soldiers scattered, momentarily stunned by the sight of humanity's secret weapon awakening. Arya stood at the edge of the chamber, watching as the ship ascended into the sky. The rebellion had just begun, and though the fight ahead would be long and brutal, humanity had proven it still had the will to fight. The spark of rebellion had been ignited, and nothing, not even the alien invaders, could extinguish it now. The Concord had been relentless in their pursuit of humanity's last stronghold, but now they faced a new challenge, one they had not anticipated. The human resistance, once fractured and on the brink of collapse, had struck back with surprising strength. The resurgence, the ancient warship unearthed from beneath the ruins of Earth, had torn through Concord supply lines, giving humanity a glimmer of hope. But the aliens were not known for their mercy, and they would not let a few setbacks stand in their way. The Concord High Command, shaken by humanity's unexpected resurgence, turned to their most feared general, Cyrex the Unyielding. Cyrex was a legend, a being of unmatched cunning and brutality. His race, the Solari, were known for their cold efficiency in war, and Cyrex was their finest commander. The stories of his victories had spread across the galaxy, and his reputation for crushing resistance was feared by all. When the Concord's leaders summoned him, they knew they were sending their most lethal weapon to deal with the human uprising. Cyrex arrived at Concord's command station, a sprawling fortress in the heart of their war fleet. The massive warship was adorned with the symbols of his people, gleaming obsidian panels and jagged spikes that reflected the cold stars. As he stepped onto the command deck, the room fell silent. His presence alone commanded fear. His dark eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the crew around him. "The humans are proving resilient," said the fleet admiral, a high-ranking officer in the Concord Army. "They've found something we didn't anticipate." Cyrex turned, his voice low but firm. "Then we will remove the threat. Let them play their games. They won't survive when I am done." He moved quickly, giving no time for hesitation. His plan was simple: hunt the humans down, destroy their hope, and crush their resistance before they could form any lasting threat. The resurgence had given them a taste of human ingenuity, but Cyrex understood that humanity's strength lay not in their technology, but in their spirit. And that spirit had to be broken, burned away until nothing remained but ashes. Cyrex's first target was a human colony on the edge of the solar system, a small but vital outpost that had been used as a staging ground for the resistance. It was a place where humans had dared to rebuild, thinking they had escaped the alien gaze. Cyrex would show them how wrong they were. His forces descended without mercy, his ships blotting out the stars as they unleashed a devastating bombardment. The colony's defenses crumbled under the onslaught, and within hours, the once thriving outpost was reduced to a pile of smoldering rubble. The message was clear: Cyrex would not be stopped. In the wake of this destruction, the human resistance felt the weight of the loss. Aria Dorian, who had led the charge in uncovering the resurgence, now found herself grappling with the reality of war. The loss of the colony was a blow, but it was not the end. The resistance scattered, regrouping in secret hideouts, but their morale was shaken. The Concord had shown their power, and Cyrex's brutality left a scar on the minds of the survivors. But Cyrex was not content with mere victories. He knew the key to victory wasn't just destroying human settlements, it was breaking their spirit. He would find and eliminate the leaders of the resistance, and once their hope was crushed, humanity would fall. As Cyrex's forces spread across the galaxy, the resistance had no choice but to go into hiding, biding their time. Aria knew this war was far from over. If humanity had any hope of surviving, they would need to outthink Cyrex, to strike when he least expected it. The odds were stacked against them, but one thing had become painfully clear: humanity's fight for a brighter tomorrow would not be won by strength alone. It would be won by their unyielding will to survive. The team moved cautiously through the dark corridors of the Concord flagship, each step echoing in the cold silence. Aria led the charge, her senses alert to every flicker of light, every shift in the atmosphere. This was the heart of the enemy, Cyrex's domain, the very place where the human resistance had been crushed time and again. To infiltrate it was a gamble, but it was the only hope they had left. They had learned of a critical weakness in Cyrex's command structure, a device that, if destroyed, could cripple the Concord's entire fleet. The fate of humanity rested on their ability to reach it. The Concord flagship was a fortress of alien architecture, its walls alive with strange symbols and intricate patterns. The air was thick with an unnerving hum, the sound of countless machines working in unison. Aria's team had no time to waste. They had infiltrated the ship under the cover of darkness, disguised as maintenance crews, and now they needed to find the heart of the vessel, the control room that housed the device. Kellen and the other soldiers moved silently behind her, weapons at the ready. They had trained for this moment, but no amount of preparation could fully prepare them for the cold, oppressive atmosphere of the alien warship. Every step felt like a violation, an intrusion into a realm far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. "This place gives me chills," Kellen muttered, his voice barely a whisper. Aria didn't reply. She focused on the mission. They had one chance at this, and failure meant certain death. The device they sought was buried deep in the ship's core, guarded by the best that Cyrex's forces had to offer. If they could disable it, the entire fleet would lose its ability to coordinate. Without Cyrex's leadership, the Concorde would be vulnerable. After hours of navigating the maze-like ship, the team reached the central chamber. It was massive, with walls made of a material that shimmered like liquid metal. The device was located at the far end of the room, encased in an energy field that pulsed with a faint, eerie glow. The device itself resembled a massive crystalline structure, suspended in midair by unseen forces. Oria's breath caught in her throat as she realized the sheer magnitude of what they were about to do. "We found it," Oria said quietly, her voice filled with awe and trepidation. Marla, the engineer who had been working on decrypting the ship's systems, stepped forward cautiously, her fingers hovering over a console. The energy field around the device crackled, and the faintest flicker of light danced across the surface. "I can disable the field, but it's going to take time," she said, her voice tense. "And the longer we take, the more likely we are to be discovered." Arya nodded, signaling for the soldiers to take up defensive positions around the chamber. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing louder by the second. Cyrex's forces were closing in. The team had to move quickly. As Marla worked to disable the energy field, the tension in the air became unbearable. Arya's heart pounded in her chest, her fingers twitching at the hilt of her weapon. The fate of the human race rested on this mission, and they couldn't afford to fail. The walls seemed to close in as the sound of approaching Concorde soldiers grew deafening. With a final, urgent press of a button, Marla deactivated the field. The device was now vulnerable, but the team had no time to admire their success. The room was flooded with bright red lights as alarms blared throughout the ship. The Concorde had found them. "Move, now," Arya shouted. The soldiers opened fire, the sound of blaster shots filling the room as they fought off the advancing Concorde forces. Kellen and the others held the line, giving Marla the precious seconds she needed. Arya's heart raced as she sprinted toward the device, knowing that every moment they delayed could mean the end of their mission, and of humanity itself. With a loud crash, the device shattered, sending shockwaves through the ship. The Concorde flagship trembled as if it were alive, its systems failing one by one. The team knew they had succeeded, but the cost was high. As the ship shook violently, Arya and her team fought their way back to the extraction point, knowing they had just struck a devastating blow to the heart of the enemy. But the battle was far from over. They had awakened a storm, and Cyrex would come for them with all the fury of a cornered predator. The explosion reverberated through the Concorde flagship, a violent shockwave that sent Arya and her team stumbling. The moment the device shattered, the air seemed to crackle with energy as the alien warship's systems began to fail. The lights flickered and alarms blared, but the Resistance soldiers didn't stop. Their mission was far from over. They had crippled the ship, but they weren't the only ones who'd noticed. The Concorde would retaliate, and they'd retaliate hard. As the team made their way back through the dim corridors of the ship, the sounds of battle echoed around them. The Concorde forces were closing in, their pursuit relentless. They moved swiftly, using the chaos to their advantage, but there was no denying the toll the fight had taken. Arya's legs burned with exhaustion, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Kellen's face was streaked with blood, and Marla, the engineer, had her hands trembling from the strain of her earlier work. The weight of the war was taking its toll on them all. They reached the extraction point, where a hastily assembled shuttle was waiting for them, parked in the ship's lower hangar bay. The shuttle was their only escape route, and the crew knew it was only a matter of time before the Concorde sent reinforcements to seal off all exits. The team was running on borrowed time. "Get in," Arya shouted, her voice harsh with urgency. Kellen and the others piled into the shuttle, and Arya was the last to board. As the shuttle's engines roared to life, she glanced over her shoulder at the rapidly approaching enemy forces. The Concorde had regrouped and was prepared to make their final stand. It was only a matter of moments before they would be overwhelmed. But Arya didn't look back. They had done what they came to do, and now they needed to survive to fight another day. The shuttle blasted into the sky, breaking free from the wreckage of the flagship. As they ascended, Arya allowed herself a brief moment of relief. They had succeeded, but that fleeting sense of triumph quickly evaporated as the shuttle's systems flickered. A warning light flashed across the control panel, and the pilot cursed under his breath. "We've got a hit," he reported. "We're losing power. We won't make it far without a fix." Arya's stomach twisted. The fight had cost them more than they'd bargained for. They had crippled the Concorde flagship, but in doing so, they had drawn the wrath of Cyrex and his forces. The price of war was never paid in easy victories, and now the cost was becoming clear. It wasn't just the lives lost, the soldiers who had given everything. They had also lost something more fundamental. The spark of hope that had driven them, the belief that they could win, was beginning to fade under the weight of so much sacrifice. The shuttle's systems began to sputter, and the landscape of Earth below grew more distant as they broke through the atmosphere. But as they soared toward their rendezvous point, Arya couldn't shake the nagging thought that no victory would come without more pain, more loss. She looked out the small window as the stars spread out before her, a sea of cold, indifferent light. There would be no turning back from this war, no escaping the price of survival. "The war's far from over," Arya murmured, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. "But we can't stop now, not when we're so close." Kellen glanced at her, his face drawn and tired, but his eyes still burning with the same fire that had driven them to this point. "Not until we win," he said softly. Arya nodded, her resolve hardening. They had taken the first step, but they knew the road ahead would be long, filled with more battles, more losses, and more sacrifices. But they would continue, because the price of war was steep, and humanity had already paid too much to back down now. The Resistance had no illusions left. The Concorde had been dealt a major blow with the destruction of the flagship and its command system, but Cyrex was still out there, waiting, watching. Humanity's small victory had only served to intensify the resolve of the invaders. They had no choice now. The war had escalated to its final, decisive phase, and Arya knew that the fate of Earth, of the human race, would be sealed in the coming battle. The Resistance had regrouped on the last remaining stronghold, the hidden city of Argonauta, buried deep within the mountains. It was humanity's final sanctuary, and the Concorde would not let it stand for long. Cyrex, ever the strategist, had already positioned his fleet in orbit, waiting to strike. Time was running out. Arya stood before the gathered Resistance forces, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on her shoulders. The faces around her were tired, worn down by the endless battles, the losses that had already been incurred, but there was a fire in their eyes, a shared understanding that this was it. This was their last chance. "We fought long and hard to get here," Arya said, her voice steady but full of conviction. "We've lost so much, but we are not broken. They think they can crush us with their armies, with their technology, but they haven't understood what makes us human. We fight for something greater than survival. We fight for our future, for our children, for our freedom." Her words hung in the air, the silence that followed thick with anticipation. Every person there knew the risks, knew the odds. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they weren't ready to give up. Not yet. "We have one chance," Arya continued. "The Concorde will attack with everything they have, but they've underestimated our strength, our resilience. We hit them hard, and we hit them fast. This will be a battle for everything." Kellen, who had been standing beside her, gave her a nod. He knew what was coming. The strategy had been set. The human fleet would engage the Concorde forces in a fierce offensive, but it wasn't the first wave that would win the war. It was what came next. Their real objective wasn't to destroy the invaders in open combat. It was to infiltrate the heart of the enemy's command fleet and strike at Syrax directly. If they could kill the general, the Concorde would collapse without its leader. As the first shots rang out in the opening phase of the battle, Arya's heart pounded in her chest. The sky above was filled with flashes of light as ships engaged in combat. The human fleet, though vastly smaller, fought with a desperation that made each blow hit harder, each maneuver more unpredictable. They were fighting not just for survival, but for the future of everything they had ever known. But as the battle raged on, a heavy realization sank in. This would be no easy victory. The Concorde had brought its full force, and Syrax had thought ahead. The fleet was a trap. It wasn't just humanity's ships that had been drawn in, it was their forces that Syrax had been waiting for. An explosion rocked the battlefield, sending Arya tumbling. The shuttle had barely managed to avoid the blast, and Kellen's voice came through the comms, urgent. Arya, we've got incoming. Syrax is launching his final counterattack. He's coming for you. Arya's pulse quickened. The moment she had feared had arrived. The last battle was no longer just about their fleet or ships. It was about their survival against a relentless enemy who wouldn't stop until every last one of them was wiped out. But they couldn't afford to falter now. Arya gritted her teeth and grabbed her weapon. The humans would fight until their last breath. It was humanity's greatest weapon, an unbreakable will to never surrender. The last battle would be their hardest, but it would also be their defining moment. The fight for tomorrow had arrived, and they would not let Syrax or the Concorde destroy it. The battle raged on, a storm of fire and metal, filling the sky with chaos. Earth's last stand was unfolding in front of Arya, her heart pounding as the world she fought to protect trembled. The enemy's fleet was overwhelming, its ships moving like a wall of darkness against the backdrop of burning stars. Humanity's forces were being pushed to their limits, but they weren't giving up. They fought with everything they had left. Arya's shuttle narrowly dodged another barrage from the Concorde flagship, the hull groaning under the strain. The explosions outside were deafening, and the crew struggled to keep the ship on course. The mission was clear: get to Syrax's command vessel and strike at the heart of the Concorde war machine. But the closer they got, the more intense the enemy's counterattack became. Syrax was no fool. He knew the humans would try to kill him, and he would stop them, no matter the cost. "We're almost there," Kellen yelled over the roar of the ship's engines. His voice was grim, his hands steady on the controls. "But if we don't break through their line soon, we won't make it. We need to move now, or we'll all be dead." Arya nodded, her eyes never leaving the viewport as the Concorde flagship loomed large in the distance. The massive ship was a fortress, heavily fortified with energy shields and weaponry. It was Syrax's pride, and he had it surrounded with his most elite forces. Infiltrating it would be suicide, but they didn't have a choice. If they didn't reach Syrax, if they didn't end his command, the human race would be wiped out. "We're going in," Arya said firmly, as if saying it aloud could will the shuttle into victory. "Hold tight." The shuttle shook as it plunged deeper into the heart of the enemy lines, weaving through fire and debris. They were close now, too close for comfort. The defensive fire from the Concorde flagship was relentless, its beams of energy lancing out, trying to slice through the small resistance ship. Arya's mind raced as she focused on the mission. They couldn't afford to hesitate. "Arya, they're going to intercept us," Marla shouted from the back of the shuttle, her voice filled with panic. "We can't outrun them much longer." Arya's eyes burned with determination. They were at the mercy of the enemy, but they couldn't stop. Not now. The fate of humanity was in her hands. She gripped the controls tightly, steering the shuttle through another blast of fire as it veered toward the flagship's open docking bay. The shuttle shook violently as it made contact with the ship, the metal groaning as it was swallowed by the docking bay's gravity field. They had made it in. but the moment they landed, the doors burst open, and the ship's interior was filled with the sound of incoming fire. "Move, now," Arya yelled, leaping out of the shuttle. The team poured out, weapons raised, prepared to fight their way through the ship. The Concord soldiers, heavily armed and ready for anything, were already waiting. They fought fiercely, but the humans were driven by something greater than fear. They were driven by the need to survive, to protect the future. They pushed forward through the ship's maze-like corridors, the walls echoing with the sound of gunfire. Every step brought them closer to Cyrex, but it was clear now that this was no ordinary battle. The fight for humanity's future wasn't just about tactics, it was about sacrifice. The cost of this war was heavier than any of them had imagined. Lives were lost, hopes were shattered, and dreams were crushed beneath the weight of the conflict. But Arya knew that even in the darkest hour, humanity had something the Concord could never comprehend: a spark of hope, a refusal to give up. This fight wasn't over. Not yet. As they reached the heart of the flagship, the doors to Cyrex's command center slid open. The broken dawn of humanity's final hope was rising. The battle had only just begun. The command center was a vast, sterile space, filled with alien technology that pulsed with an eerie, unnatural glow. Arya and her team stormed in, weapons raised, eyes scanning for any sign of Cyrex. The silence that greeted them was unnerving. There were no soldiers here, no defense systems protecting the heart of the Concord's power. It was almost as if the flagship had been abandoned, but Arya knew better. Cyrex wasn't hiding, he was waiting for them. Kellen was the first to break the stillness. "He's here," he said, his voice low but certain. Somewhere. The walls around them shifted, and a holographic projection flared to life in the center of the room. Cyrex's image flickered, his cold, calculating gaze piercing through the space. He was not a man of many words, and his message was brief. "You think you've won, human." Cyrex's voice echoed across the room, flat and void of emotion. "Your rebellion is nothing but a fleeting spark. I am the future of this galaxy, and you are nothing but a dying species, clinging to a past that no longer exists." Arya's blood ran cold, but her resolve remained firm. "The future isn't just yours to decide, Cyrex. We'll make sure of that." Before he could respond, the hologram blinked and dissolved, replaced by a surge of automated defenses. The walls came to life, firing energy blasts at the intruders. Arya dove behind a console, narrowly avoiding the blast, while Kellen returned fire, taking down the nearest turret. "We don't have much time," Arya shouted. "We have to disable the core. Now." The team pushed forward, their every step met with resistance. They fought through wave after wave of enemy defenses, but Cyrex was one step ahead, altering the layout of the command center with his advanced technology. He had anticipated this moment, and he was going to make sure it would be their last. But the humans weren't deterred. They fought through the chaos, relying on each other, pushing past their fear. Marla, who had been instrumental in hacking the Concord systems, quickly found the access point to the central command core. "I've got it," she yelled, her fingers flying over the controls. "I'm taking down the shield. Hold them off for just a few more seconds." Arya's pulse quickened. They were so close. If Marla succeeded, they could shut down Cyrex's power base, crippling the entire fleet. It would be a blow the Concord couldn't recover from. The room shook as a massive explosion rocked the flagship. The team was thrown off balance, but they didn't stop. Kellen and the others continued to hold off the relentless waves of enemy forces, knowing that their fight wasn't just for survival anymore, it was for the future. Marla's voice broke through the chaos. "It's done. The shield's down." Arya didn't hesitate. She charged toward the heart of the command core, where Cyrex's main console pulsed with deadly energy. The alien general's image flickered one last time, his eyes filled with fury and disbelief. "You will not win," he growled. "You cannot understand the power I wield." But Arya wasn't listening. She was already placing the final charge, the last piece of humanity's hope. With a quick motion, she activated it. The command core detonated in a blinding flash of light, the shockwave rippling through the entire flagship. The walls crumbled, and the ship groaned as its systems spiraled into chaos. The Concord fleet above, cut off from their leader, faltered. Cyrex's grip on the galaxy had finally been broken. As the flagship began to disintegrate, the team made their way to the extraction point, their faces a mix of exhaustion and triumph. Earth's survival had been secured, but the cost had been high. They had sacrificed so much, lost so much, but humanity had prevailed, as it always did. As they emerged into the light of dawn, Arya looked out across the sky, the first rays of the new day breaking through the darkness. The battle was over. The future was theirs to rebuild, and with it, humanity's brighter tomorrow had finally arrived.